I think just sort of moving swiftly into industries, because I think that's obviously the cornerstone pretty much of this whole conversation. You know, sort of talk to different people in the different industries, and how they can really adopt and how they can really think about the metaverse and what it really means for them. Maybe starting off with something like commerce. And I think, Olga, do you want to start off over there, just in terms of like what does the metaverse really mean for e-commerce? I mean, both luxury and sort of non-luxury.
Of course. I mean, I think the concept of metaverse for a lot of brands, and there's a lot of misconception there at the moment, where every single conversation with a brand we're having today starts with, how do we create a metaverse? And how do we create a brand metaverse? So what we used to call a virtual store 6 months ago is now called a brand metaverse. And in terms of existing platforms, so if we're looking at kind of Decentraland roadblocks, there's also a lot of misconception there, because when it comes to luxury, most brands don't really want to go there because it doesn't necessarily suffice in terms of quality and how they want to position their brand and present themselves. And all the things that we're seeing, and a lot of the things we're seeing, are quite experimental, and it's a lot about driving traffic and driving interest and driving publicity, like a very successful Metaverse Fashion Week that run in Decentraland, or activations like we're seeing with companies like Forever 21, also in Decentraland, or Gucci Garden, Roblox, and things like that. But what we're also seeing is a lot of interest in creating virtual experiences for brands that run through their own channels and don't necessarily plug into other platforms, because what it is for fashion in particular, and generally for commerce, it's a lot about brand presentation, and it's a lot about discovery. Like if you think about shopping in a physical store, it's about discovery, it's about entertainment, it's about customer service. Like there's a lot more to it than just a product and a price tag to this product. Then if we think about e-commerce, it's a white page. It doesn't matter whether you're on Dior.com or on Zara.com, it's the same white page, it's a list of products. By the time you scroll through 15 pages of that, you just don't want anything anymore, and you want to go and forget about this whole horrible experience. So the experience element is really not there, and there's a demand for experience, particularly from Gen Z demographics that all companies in retail are targeting these days. And that's where it really comes into play, to actually enable a better consumer experience, an experience that's more engaging and more well-rounded, and actually enables this discovery for consumers. And that's where we're seeing a lot of use cases kind of going across like both existing metaverse platforms, but also developing their own kind of brand experiences that live within their own websites.
I like that. That's brilliant. And Dan, when it comes to sort of the more, I'm not going to say boring, but sort of the less exciting side, when it comes to like banking and, you know, customer service and professional services as well, how do you see, you know, how should people in those industries look at the metaverse?
Yeah, well, again, it's interesting because it reminds me of a conversation I literally had with someone yesterday, where I brand new, had never met them before, and they asked me what I did as a job, and I explained, I work with immersive companies with virtual reality, I work with augmented reality, I work with spatial audio, all these different elements, and then they asked me, you know, like a bunch of other questions, and we got onto the topic of the metaverse, and then they asked me, you know, what do you think of the metaverse? And I was like, well, we're a metaverse company essentially, if you want to define it like that. And they were like, really? and that shocked me, because I was like, I thought it was obvious that these other elements come into play. So from a professional perspective, I think, you know, businesses are looking at this on very one-sided ways at the moment, in terms of very singular things and singular elements that make up the metaverse. But going forward, you know, my hope is that when businesses are looking towards this, they're looking at the all-encompassing elements to this that would make up a professional business environment. So you've got everything from, you know, the traditional, I guess, like VR stuff, where we can have virtual environments and have that cross collaboration. I read an article this morning about how Zoom was stifling creativity in businesses. So, you know, how can we use these kind of elements to change that? and to enhance that. And then you've got everything from your more I guess boring elements of finance and accounting. I was speaking to an accountant about this, and they were asking, how does the metaverse play a role for me? And my conversation was, well, how are you interacting with your customers now? How are you interacting with the data that you receive? All of these different elements come into play.
I think it's interesting, and I think I mean, you've got a bit of a marketing background, Dan. So I think coming to think a bit like in terms of websites and almost like what does that next level of websites look like? And I think for e-commerce, I think it's always a bit obvious because exactly like Olga said, before they were called virtual showrooms, and now they're called metaverse, whatever they call metaverse environments.
Yeah, brand metaverse.
Exactly, brand metaverse. So I think for e-commerce it's a bit obvious, but I mean, for example, Dan, how would you sort of envision like a law firm's website like being sort of immersive, if that makes sense, or like an accountant's website being immersive? Because sometimes when it comes to choosing an accountant, which you're a lawyer, it doesn't have to be experiential. It's almost like you want to see they got the credentials, you want to see that they specialize in what you're looking for. How do you sort of imagine, like you said, that interaction, that touch point with the consumer getting better than what already is now in terms of websites?
Yeah, well, I'm probably biased here because I chose our accountants because the owner was an avid video gamer, and we got speaking about that. But from a more traditional perspective, I think like the actual experience. I mean, we're a completely remote company, completely fully distributed, and I think a lot of more companies are going that way. So for me, especially in roles where you need to trust individuals and you need to have that relationship with individuals, that's where for me the future of this technology, because it's not quite there yet, plays an important role. I want to be able to see people's facial cues. I want to be able to read people's emotions. I want to be able to have a conversation like I am having in real life without having to fly halfway around the world to meet that individual. So from that perspective, that's what I'm most excited about from the professional environments, from the more traditional, accounting backgrounds and things like that. But also, it's about being able to there's elements of visualization of data. I always come back to data because data is always a really challenging thing for people to get their head around, especially really, really mass amounts of data. So, it takes me back to a conversation I had with the head of digital for Barclays where we were talking about this. And, his biggest thing when he was talking about this technology with me was, well, we're trying to get young people to save more and to realize that, they need to make an investment for their future. And they wanted a way to be able to visualize money. What better way to be able to visualize how much money is in your bank account? So and these elements all come into play. What it's going to be exactly, I don't think we know just yet, but I think that's the exciting thing about it.
And I think to echo a couple of Daniel's points there. What we're really seeing a lot is interest from all the different types of industries. And if we're looking at, say, the financial district in Decentraland, which has been very popular in the recent weeks and months, and a lot of venture capital firms and even banks opening their offices within Decentraland financial district. And it's becoming a lot about having your brand present where the consumers are. Right. And as a brand, doesn't matter kind of which industry you're in, you want to be present in front of your target audience, but also in front of your potential future consumers, because how else are they going to be aware of you if you're not present where they are? So I think it's becoming a lot more about creating this presence, reaching your audiences where it is, and also potentially expanding beyond the kind of what you stand for in a physical world. Like we're now having some conversations with hotel chains as well, and it's going beyond like, oh, here's a hotel room and kind of let's walk around the hotel room virtually, because what's the point? You can just take a Matterport, quick 360 tour and be done with it. You don't need 3D or Metaverse or anything like that. But then if you think about, say, travel is a lot about emotion. It's a lot about experience. It's not necessarily just about the room and what kind of bed is in the room. So that's kind of where all those things are coming into play as well. And I think that's where Metaverse can eventually bring those elements out for consumers.
Sorry, Olga, did you just say the finance district within Decentraland?
Yeah.
I love that. That's so cool.